There are silences that are louder than a confession. The silence that filled that luxury restaurant, in the instant her eyes met mine, was one of them.
In that moment, she didn't see a ghost from the past. She saw something far more terrifying.
And as I looked back, I didn't feel the satisfaction of revenge. I felt something much older, an emotion that only time and distance can carve. I felt pity to understand that silence. We have to go back 6 months, to a small apartment with walls that held more dreams than echoes.
I was the kind of man who loved with his hands. I fixed the loose shelf, made breakfast, held her hair.
Back when she was sick after a party, my love was a service, a quiet devotion. I believed, with the innocence of someone who has never truly been broken, that to be loved, I had to be useful, indispensable.
My worth was tied to her need for me. Her name was Laura.
And Laura didn't need things fixed. She needed stages. She had a hunger for life that I admired, an ambition that shone brighter than the city lights from our window.
I supported her every step. I celebrated her small victories at work, listened for hours about her plans to conquer the world.
To avoid dimming her light, I kept mine under a veil. I spoke little of my work at my family's wealth management firm. To her, I was just an analyst, a man with a steady job and a devoted heart. I made myself small so she could feel big.
Today,
I know that isn't love.
It's the prologue to a disappearance. The great vulnerability researcher, Brené Brown, talks about the difference between fitting in and belonging.
Belonging is being accepted as you are. Fitting in is contorting yourself into a version of yourself to be accepted.
I spent years
contorting myself. If stories like this resonate with you and inspire you to grow, hit the like button on this video so we know we're on the right track.
And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming narratives. The first signs weren't tremors.
They were whispers. A new obsession with the profiles of influencers who flaunted an unattainable luxury lifestyle. Offhand comments about how lucky her friend was with a boyfriend who gave her designer bags.
In my world of spreadsheets and affection, I saw it as a daydream, a harmless fantasy.
She just wants the best for us, I would repeat to myself. A comfortable liar. Told myself to postpone the truth. The truth is that intuition is the language of the soul, and my soul was telling me something in a language my mind refused to translate. The girl's nights out became more frequent. She would come back late, smelling of a perfume that wasn't on our shelf and with a sparkle in her eyes that wasn't for me. Her phone, once a forgotten object on the couch, became an extension of her body, always screened down. The space between us in bed grew wider. It was a physical abyss that mirrored the emotional one forming between us.
One night, she was in the shower, and the phone buzzed non-stop.
A part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in the fairy tale, told me to look away.
The other part, the soul that was screaming, urged me to look. The name on the screen was just manager, but the message I managed to glimpse for a fraction of a second wasn't professional.
Thinking of you, can't wait for our weekend. In that instant, the floor didn't open up.
Time froze. I tasted the metallic tang of betrayal in my mouth, a sensation I will never forget.
But I didn't confront her.
What could I say? My need to
avoid conflict, my paralyzing fear of abandonment, was greater than my need for the truth.
I swallowed the poison and pretended it was water.
I soothed myself with the excuse that it could be a misunderstanding. Therapist Esther Perel says that hope is often the biggest obstacle to clarity. My hope was a thick fog that kept me from seeing the cliff just ahead. I just didn't know that on that very day, she was already packing her life into boxes, in her
mind and in her heart. The break didn't come with an explosive fight.
There were no screams, no broken plates, just silence. I came home on a Tuesday, earlier than usual, with flowers in hand.
The door was unlocked. Half the closet was empty.
Her books were gone from the shelf.
On the coffee table where we had our morning coffee lay her apartment key and a small piece of paper.
2 sentences.
It's not you, it's me. I need something more. That was it.
A 5-year relationship ended with the coldness of a corporate
email.
The abandonment was anonymous, impersonal. It was as if our story had never existed. The pain that followed was unlike anything I had ever felt.
It wasn't the sharp pain of loss. It was the chronic pain of erasure. I wasn't replaced. I was discarded.
Deleted. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and mechanical days. I felt like a fool.
The nice guy who finished last.
The anger came later, a hot wave that burned me from the inside. But it was a mutual friend who, feeling guilty, delivered the final blow.
He showed me her profile, which was public because she hadn't even bothered to block me.
And there she was,
On a yacht, arm in arm with an older man, with a smile she never gave me.
the captions were like knives. Finally living the life I deserve, where I always belonged. The man was a known city socialite, famous more for his
inheritance than his merit. At that moment, seeing that image, something inside me snapped. The great physician and trauma expert, Garbalmat, teaches that trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you.
The trauma wasn't her leaving with another man.
The trauma was the story that picture told me, the story that I wasn't enough.
That my love, my care, my dedication had no market value.
And for a while, I believed that story.
I drowned in it. But rock bottom has an advantage. It gives you a solid floor to push off from, and I decided to use that momentum. The first conscious
decision I made was to stop looking for more pain. I blocked her on all social media. I deleted the photos.
The second decision was to look for myself. I dove into the work I had always downplayed.
The business my father built and that I helped manage.
Wealth management, trust funds, legacies, a world of discretion, trust, and multi-digit numbers. A world Laura never truly knew because I was afraid it would intimidate her.
I traded the pain of grief for the focus of purpose. I started therapy.
I began to rebuild my identity, not around who needed me, but around who I was. We are right at the turning point of this intense story.
If you're feeling the power of this transformation, consider subscribing now to follow us to the end and discover more tales of resilience and strength. It was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after the end, that fate, with its exquisite irony, knocked on my door.
I was conducting a quarterly audit of the funds our firm managed.
It was routine, names and numbers on a screen, and then I saw it.
A name that made my heart stop for a second.
The full name of the socialite Laura was with. His family had been clients of our firm for generations.
And his trust fund, the source of his entire lavish lifestyle, was managed by us. More specifically, by a committee I was part of, a committee with veto power over any extraordinary withdrawal. My first thought was a revenge fantasy.
I could freeze everything.
I could cut off the source that fueled that life of appearances. I could destroy the house of cards she believed was a fortress. The feeling of power was intoxicating, a quick antidote to the pain of helplessness I had felt for so long. But then, I took a deep breath. I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen.
And I saw the man I was striving to become. A man of integrity. The philosopher Bell Hooks wrote that love is an action, not a feeling. And I realized that true strength, true self-love is also an action.
And the most powerful action I could take was
to do nothing.
To choose my peace over their pain. To choose my character over their chaos. Revenge is a fire that burns itself
out after destroying its target.
Transformation is building something fireproof.
I chose to transform. The following months were of quiet growth.
I became one of the top managers at the firm. My confidence no longer came from someone else's validation, but from my own competence.
I was at peace until one Monday morning, an email arrived.
A meeting request from the socialite's lawyer.
The client wished to make a significant withdrawal from the fund. The reason? The purchase of an engagement ring from a famous jeweler and a down payment on a mansion in a gated community.
Standard procedure required an in-person meeting with a committee member. I assigned myself the task.
I scheduled it at a discreet, expensive restaurant, a place she would love.
I knew she would be there when I arrived. They were already at the table. Laura was radiant, dressed in silk, laughing at something he was saying.
Then she saw me. The smile froze. The color drained from her face. The man beside her, oblivious to everything, stood up and extended his hand.
You must be Mr. Martins.
I'm so and so. A pleasure. He introduced me to her, as if we were two strangers.
This is Laura, my fiancée. I shook his hand and nodded at her, a polite, impersonal gesture.
Miss.
We sat down. The air was thick with everything unsaid. I opened my folder and got straight to the point. With a calmness I didn't know I possessed, I reviewed the proposal. I spoke of the trust spirals, created by his grandfather. I spoke of
the capital preservation clause,
about high-risk expenditures and the need to maintain long-term solvency. My voice didn't waver.
I wasn't the wounded ex-boyfriend. I was the authority.
The voice of reason, of prudence, of legacy.
At the end of my analysis, I looked at him and said, with the utmost tranquility, based on the terms of the fund and the volatile nature of this type of expense, I'm sorry to inform you, but the committee cannot approve this withdrawal at this time. The silence that followed was the sound of reality colliding with fantasy.
His face went from surprise to anger, hers from shock to panic. She looked at me with a desperate plea. The woman who needed something more, now needing me in the rawest way possible.
But there was nothing in me that rejoiced. I gathered my papers, stood up, shook the man's hand again.
We can reevaluate safer investment proposals in the future.
Have a good day. I nodded at Laura one last time and turned away. Every step out of that restaurant was a step away from the man I was, and closer to the man I had become. The victory wasn't in seeing her fall. The victory was in feeling nothing but a deep, silent peace. I never heard from them again. I learned through the grapevine that the engagement was called off weeks later.
My work remains the same, managing futures and legacies.
But the most important legacy I learned to manage was my own. Today, the woman I share my life with met me as I am, whole.
She doesn't need me to be useful.
She wants me because she respects me. I learned in practice what the Gottman Institute teaches about emotional bank accounts. I spent years depositing into an account that was chronically overdrawn. Today, I only invest in relationships with
reciprocity. The hardest and most valuable lesson was this: you cannot control who leaves you, but you have absolute control over who you become after they're gone. The door Laura closed wasn't the end of my story.
It was the beginning.
She pushed me out of a small life I built to fit her dreams, and without knowing it, pushed me into a life the size of my own dreams. If anyone has ever made you feel like you weren't enough, remember, it was their world that was too small, not your value.
Your reconstruction doesn't begin when you prove your worth to them.
It begins the moment you stop trying and just live that worth for yourself. This journey taught me that the greatest asset isn't listed on the stock market. If you also believe that peace of mind is the greatest wealth one can have, comment below. My peace is priceless.
Like this video if you agree that sometimes silence is the most powerful answer.
And subscribe for more stories about the architecture of an authentic life.